The platinum-haired CEO in her crimson dress curled her lips in contempt at the sight of William Carter, the silent janitor standing near the display helicopter. Before hundreds of guests, she threw out her bitter challenge with a sneer that could cut glass. "Fly this helicopter, and I'll marry you." Mocking laughter erupted across the venue, but in William's calm eyes lay something deeper, something hidden. No one knew he was once a legendary military pilot. The September evening air carried the scent of expensive perfume and champagne as Manhattan's elite gathered on the 40th floor rooftop of Sterling Tower. Alexandra Sterling commanded attention the moment she stepped from the private elevator. At 34, she had inherited not just her father's billion-dollar aerospace company but also his ruthless drive for perfection. Her platinum blonde hair, styled in soft waves, caught the light like spun silver. Those ice-blue eyes had made grown executives tremble in boardrooms across the city. Tonight, she wore a body-hugging red dress with a plunging V-neck, every inch designed to project power and untouchable beauty. She moved through the crowd like a queen among subjects, accepting compliments with practiced smiles that never reached her eyes. Behind that flawless exterior, Alexandra fought demons no one saw. Her father's shadow loomed large, even 3 years after his retirement. Every deal she closed, every innovation she pushed through, every success she achieved, none of it seemed enough to prove she deserved the throne she'd inherited. The loneliness that came with absolute power had frozen something inside her, turning her sharp tongue into a weapon she wielded without mercy. Across the rooftop, invisible to most of the glittering crowd, William Carter methodically emptied waste bins and wiped down surfaces. At 36, he stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, with shoulders that stretched his gray uniform shirt tight across his back. His hands, scarred and calloused, moved with unexpected grace. The fluorescent lights of the service area had given his skin a permanent tan, and premature lines creased the corners of his dark eyes that held depths most people never bothered to explore. His worn uniform had seen better days, the Sterling Industries logo fading on the breast pocket. The work boots he wore were resoled twice over, the jeans patched at the knees, but William carried himself with quiet dignity, never rushing, never seeking attention. To the party guests, he was furniture necessary but unnoticed. They didn't see the way his gaze occasionally drifted to the helicopter on display, a sleek Augusta Westland worth $8 million, or how his fingers twitched slightly when the aircraft's rotors caught the wind. The rooftop venue was Alexandra's personal triumph, transformed from a simple helipad into Manhattan's most exclusive event space. Tonight's gala celebrated Sterling Industries' latest aviation technology acquisition. The helicopter sat like a crown jewel on the reinforced platform, its polished fuselage reflecting the city lights. Investment bankers mingled with tech moguls while fashion models posed for photographers. Waiters in white gloves circulated with Dom Perignon, while a string quartet played Mozart in the corner. Everything was perfect, controlled, exactly as Alexandra demanded. The first sign of trouble came when Marcus Webb, the company's chief pilot, suddenly clutched his throat. His face turned crimson, then purple, as he gasped for air. The shrimp he was deathly allergic, and somehow, despite all precautions, he'd been exposed. Within seconds, he collapsed, his body convulsing as his throat closed. The medical team rushed him toward the service elevator, while guests stepped back in horror. Alexandra's perfect evening began to crack. The backup pilot, stationed in Queens, called in stuck behind a massive pileup on the Brooklyn Bridge. Traffic wasn't moving for miles. To make matters worse, weather radar showed an unexpected storm system moving in from the Atlantic, winds already gusting at 40 knots and climbing. The helicopter needed to be moved immediately, not just for the storm, but because Manhattan Presbyterian's medical helicopter was 5 minutes out, carrying a heart transplant patient whose life hung by a thread. The display helicopter was blocking the only landing zone. Security Chief James Morrison approached Alexandra, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool evening air. "Ma'am, we need that bird moved now. If that medevac can't land, that patient dies." Alexandra's jaw tightened. Her perfect event was crumbling, and hundreds of guests were watching, recording, waiting to see how the Ice Queen would handle crisis. That's when she saw William Carter standing near the helicopter, studying it with an expression she couldn't read. The janitor, of all people. Looking at her $8 million aircraft, the absurdity of it triggered something cruel in her, a need to deflect the embarrassment onto someone else. She strode across the rooftop, her heels clicking like gunshots on the concrete. "Well, janitor," she announced, her voice carrying across the sudden quiet. "Here's your chance. Fly this helicopter right now, and I'll marry you. Come on, show everyone you're more than just the man who empties our trash." The crowd erupted in nervous laughter, grateful for the distraction from the crisis. Some raised their phones, sensing viral content in the making. "What's wrong? Don't know which end goes up?" William turned to face her, and for the first time, Alexandra saw something in those dark eyes that made her step back. Not anger, not humiliation. Something else entirely. Understanding, perhaps, or pity. He walked past her without a word, straight to the helicopter. The crowd's laughter grew louder as William climbed into the pilot's seat. This was better entertainment than anything Alexandra could have planned. The janitor playing pretend pilot, while a real emergency unfolded. The irony was delicious. But then William's hands moved across the control panel with fluid precision. He adjusted his seat, checked the cyclic and collective, his fingers finding each switch and dial without hesitation. The laughter began to fade as William activated the electrical systems. The instrument panel lit up in sequence: navigation, communication, engine monitors, each system coming online with practiced efficiency. He pulled on the headset and began speaking into the radio, his voice calm and professional. "Sterling Tower helipad to Manhattan ATC. Requesting immediate emergency departure clearance. Medical inbound. Need to clear the zone." Alexandra's smirk froze on her face. The way he held the controls, the terminology he used, the absolute confidence in every movement. This was no amateur playing dress-up. A few guests who knew aviation exchanged glances. Former military personnel in the crowd straightened, recognizing something in William's bearing they hadn't noticed before. Inside the cockpit, William's hands trembled for just a moment as muscle memory battled with emotional trauma. 7 years. It had been 7 years since he'd sat in a pilot's seat. 7 years since the phone call that destroyed his world. Sarah's commercial flight had gone down in bad weather. Pilot error, they said, though William knew better. He'd been flying combat missions while his wife died in a preventable crash. The guilt had nearly killed him. He'd promised Audrey, just 5 years old then and clutching her mother's picture at the funeral, that Daddy would never fly again. He'd keep his feet on the ground, be there for every school play, every birthday, every nightmare. He traded his wings for a mop, his uniform for janitor's clothes. Because being present for his daughter mattered more than any amount of glory or pay. But now, with a patient's life hanging in the balance and the medevac circling desperately above, William faced an impossible choice. Break his promise to save a life, or keep his word and let someone die. Through the helicopter's window, he could see the medical chopper's lights blinking urgently in the darkening sky. 40 seconds, until they'd have to divert to another hospital. 40 seconds, that would mean death for whoever was on that stretcher. William's jaw set with determination. "Forgive me, baby girl," he whispered. Then began the startup sequence. The twin turbines sparked to life with a whine that built to a roar. Wind from the rotors sent champagne glasses flying, designer dresses whipping, carefully styled hair coming undone. Guests scrambled back as the aircraft's power became real, immediate, dangerous. This wasn't a display piece anymore. It was 7,000 pounds of sophisticated machinery coming alive under expert hands. William increased the throttle smoothly, feeling the helicopter grow light on its skids. The storm winds were picking up, gusting now at 45 knots with sudden drops and shifts that would challenge any pilot. But William had flown Blackhawks through Afghan sandstorms, had extracted wounded soldiers from hot zones where the margin for error was measured in inches. This was difficult, but not impossible. The helicopter lifted off with surgical precision, rising straight up 20 feet before William transitioned to forward flight. He banked hard left, the aircraft tilting at an angle that made several guests gasp, clearing the rooftop's edge with room to spare. The maneuver was textbook perfect, executed with the kind of skill that came from thousands of hours in the air. Alexandra stood frozen, her designer dress whipping around her legs, watching the impossible unfold. The janitor she'd mocked, the man she'd considered beneath notice, was flying her helicopter with the skill of a master. Around her, the laughter had died completely, replaced by awed silence and the growing sound of rotor blades cutting through the storm winds. An elderly man in a naval dress uniform suddenly spoke up, his voice carrying over the wind. "My God, that's Captain William Carter. I know that flying style anywhere. He's the one who saved those diplomats in Kandahar. Flew through RPG fire to extract 30 civilians from a school under siege." The words rippled through the crowd like electricity. Phones that had been recording a joke were now capturing something extraordinary. Someone pulled up military records on their tablet, and William's service photo appeared younger, clean-shaven, chest covered in commendations including the Distinguished Flying Cross and Silver Star. More stories emerged from the crowd. An investment banker recalled seeing William on the news, flying relief supplies into Haiti after the earthquake when no one else would brave the conditions. A doctor remembered the story of a pilot who stayed in the air for 14 straight hours during Hurricane Katrina, pulling from rooftops until his fuel ran dry. Each tale added another layer to the truth. The janitor they'd all ignored was a genuine hero. William guided the helicopter to the secondary pad 3 buildings over, fighting crosswinds that tried to slam him into glass towers. His landing was soft as a feather, the skids touching down with barely a bump. Within seconds of shutdown, the medevac helicopter was descending toward the cleared helipad, its precious cargo saved by those crucial minutes. As William walked back across the connecting bridge to Sterling Tower, the crowd parted before him like the Red Sea. His uniform was soaked with sweat, his hands still trembling slightly from the adrenaline, but he walked with the same quiet dignity he'd always carried. The difference was that now, people saw it. Alexandra stood at the rooftop's edge, her perfect composure finally cracked. When William approached, she raised her chin, trying to salvage some authority. "You're still just a janitor," she said, but her voice wavered. Lacking its usual bite, William stopped 3 feet from her, his dark eyes holding hers without flinching. "Yes, I am. And a janitor just saved that patient's life, prevented your company from a massive lawsuit, and kept your guests safe from a helicopter, potentially thrown into them by storm winds." His voice was calm, matter-of-fact, without a trace of boastfulness. "Being a janitor doesn't make me less than you, Miss Sterling. It just means I clean up messes. Tonight, I cleaned up yours." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, someone began to clap. Then another. Within seconds, the entire rooftop erupted in genuine applause. Guests who wouldn't normally notice the help were shaking William's hand, slapping his back, asking for selfies. Alexandra stood isolated in her red dress, watching her carefully constructed hierarchy crumble. But the evening's revelations weren't over. Margaret Sterling, Alexandra's 70-year-old mother, had been watching from her wheelchair near the elevator. Her eyes, sharp despite her age, studied William's face with growing recognition. She wheeled herself forward, her voice cutting through the celebration. "You're the pilot from Colorado," she said, her voice trembling. 8 years ago, the corporate jet that lost both engines in a bird strike. The rooftop fell silent again as she continued. "My husband was on that plane. You dead-sticked it onto a highway, saved 14 lives, including his. He said the pilot disappeared before anyone could thank him properly." Alexandra's world tilted on its axis. Her father had told that story dozens of times, the miracle landing that gave him 5 more years of life before cancer took him. She'd been at his bedside when he died, listening to him express one regret: never finding the pilot who'd saved him to say thank you. That pilot had been cleaning their offices for the past 3 years. The revelation shattered something inside Alexandra. Every casual cruelty she'd thrown at William, every time she'd walked past him like he didn't exist, every moment of disrespect, all of it crashed down on her at once. The man she'd humiliated was the reason she'd had those last precious years with her father. Her legs gave out, and she would have fallen if William hadn't stepped forward, catching her arm with the same steady hands that had saved her father's life. Up close, she could see the pain in his eyes, the weight of losses she couldn't imagine. Yet he held her with gentleness, without judgment. as if her cruelty meant nothing against the simple human need for support. "Why?" she whispered, tears she hadn't shed since her father's funeral streaming down her face. "Why didn't you ever say anything? Why clean our offices when you could be flying corporate jets for millions?" William's answer was simple. "My daughter needs a father more than she needs a rich one. After my wife died, I promised her I'd stay grounded. Every job has dignity, Miss Sterling. I chose one that lets me be home for dinner, help with homework, and tuck her in at night. No amount of money is worth missing that." The crowd had gone completely silent, the only sound the wind whipping across the rooftop. Alexandra pulled herself together with visible effort, wiping her tears with the back of her hand, smearing her perfect makeup. When she spoke, her voice carried across the rooftop, picked up by dozens of phones still recording. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Carter. Not just for tonight, but for 3 years of disrespect. You saved my father's life, gave me 5 more years with him, and I repaid that by treating you as less than human." She took a shaky breath. "I was wrong. Completely. Utterly wrong. And I'm sorry." The words cost her everything: her carefully maintained image, her reputation as untouchable, her entire worldview. But in speaking them, she felt something shift inside her chest, some frozen part beginning to thaw. The crowd remained silent, witnessing something they'd never expected. Alexandra Sterling humbling herself before a janitor. William nodded slowly. "Apology accepted, Miss Sterling. We all carry our pain differently. Yours made you hard. Mine made me invisible. Maybe that's changing tonight." Alexandra straightened, some of her business acumen returning despite her emotional state. "Sterling Industries needs a new head of aviation safety. Someone who understands both the technical and human elements of flight. The position comes with a 7-figure salary, full benefits, and flexible hours for family commitments. I'm offering it to you." The crowd held its breath. Fairy tale, ending they'd all been waiting for, the janitor becoming an executive. The American dream playing out in real time. But William shook his head gently. "I appreciate the offer, but I have a job. However, if you're serious about aviation safety, I'd consult part-time, evenings and weekends. When my daughter's with her grandmother, I know every aircraft in your fleet, and I know what kills pilots. That knowledge might save lives." It wasn't the dramatic acceptance everyone expected, but somehow it was better a man who knew his priorities and wouldn't compromise them for any amount of money. Alexandra nodded, respecting him more for the refusal than she would have for acceptance. "There's still the matter of my promise," she said. And a ripple of uncomfortable laughter ran through the crowd. "I said, if you flew the helicopter, I'd marry you." William smiled then. The first genuine smile anyone had seen from him. "Miss Sterling, we both know that was mockery, not a real proposal. I wouldn't hold you to words spoken in cruelty. Besides," his eyes softened, "my daughter's the only girl in my life. At least until she's old enough to understand that her dad might want to date again." Alexandra felt something she hadn't experienced in years: genuine admiration for another human being. This man had every right to humiliate her as she'd humiliated him, to demand she keep her promise for the sake of viral fame. Instead, he offered grace she didn't deserve. The party gradually resumed, though the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. Guests, who'd never spoken to service staff, found themselves having real conversations with waiters and security guards. The artificial barriers that Alexandra had reinforced with her behavior began to crumble. William stayed for another hour, not as a janitor or a hero, but simply as a guest, telling stories of his flying days to an eager audience. As the evening wound down, William made his way to the service elevator. He had to pick up Audrey from her grandmother's house, had promised to read her a bedtime story, but Alexandra caught him at the elevator doors, now changed into jeans and a simple sweater, her CEO armor abandoned. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything. For my father. For tonight. For not destroying me when you had every right to." William studied her for a moment, seeing past the beauty to the lonely woman underneath. "We all deserve second chances, Miss Sterling. The question is what we do with them." As the elevator doors closed, Alexandra stood alone in the service corridor. Her entire world restructured in a single evening. The janitor she'd mocked had shown more class and dignity than she'd ever possessed. The challenge now was to become worthy of the grace he'd shown her. William arrived home to find Audrey waiting at the window, her small face lighting up when his truck pulled into the driveway. She flew into his arms the moment he opened the door, her dark hair so like her mother's tickling his face as she hugged him tight. "Daddy, you smell like helicopters," she said, pulling back to look at him with curious eyes. "Did something happen at work?" William carried her to the couch, settling her on his lap. "Sometimes, sweetheart, we have to break promises to save lives. Tonight, Daddy had to fly again to help someone who was very sick. Are you upset with me?" Audrey's 7-year-old face scrunched in thought. Then she shook her head firmly. "Mommy would understand. She always said helping people was the most important thing. But Daddy..." Her voice grew serious. "You came back. You always come back." William held her tighter, tears threatening for the first time that evening. "Always, baby girl. I'll always come back." As he tucked Audrey into bed, her eyes already heavy with sleep, the doorbell rang. William found Alexandra Sterling on his doorstep, holding a large envelope and looking more uncertain than he'd ever seen her. Behind her, a black town car idled in the street. "I'm sorry to bother you at home," she began, then seemed to notice the modest house, the toys scattered in the living room, the photos of Sarah on the mantel. "I wanted to give you this personally." The envelope contained documents for the William and Sarah Carter Foundation for Aviation Safety, initially funded with $10 million from Alexandra's personal fortune. It would provide training for pilots in emergency procedures, support for families who'd lost loved ones in aviation accidents, and scholarships for veterans transitioning to civilian aviation careers. "This island..." "Excessive," William said, stunned by the gesture. "It's necessary," Alexandra replied. "I've spent 3 years building walls around myself, using my power to diminish others. Maybe it's time I used it to lift people up instead." She paused, noticing Audrey peeking around the corner in her pajamas. "Is that the mean lady from your work, Daddy?" Audrey asked with a child's directness. Alexandra knelt down to Audrey's level, her designer jeans hitting the worn carpet. "I was mean," she admitted. "But your daddy taught me something important tonight. He taught me that being powerful doesn't make you better than anyone else. Being kind does." Audrey studied her with those serious dark eyes, then stepped forward and patted Alexandra's hand. "It's okay. Daddy says everyone makes mistakes. The important thing is to fix them." Something broke in Alexandra's expression, a vulnerability that transformed her face completely. "Your daddy's a very wise man, and you're a very lucky little girl." As Alexandra stood to leave, Audrey tugged on William's hand. "Daddy, she looks lonely. Maybe she could stay for hot chocolate?" The two adults locked eyes over the child's head, a moment of understanding passing between them. William saw the isolation behind Alexandra's success, the price she'd paid for power. Alexandra saw the wealth William had chosen not in money, but in love, purpose, and peace. "What do you think, Miss Sterling? My daughter makes excellent hot chocolate. She even adds mini marshmallows." Alexandra's smile was tentative but genuine. "I haven't had hot chocolate in 20 years. And please, call me Alex." They sat in William's small kitchen, the billionaire CEO and the janitor pilot, while a 7-year-old girl served them cocoa in mismatched mugs. Audrey chattered about school, her best friend Emma, and the science project she was building with her dad. Alexandra found herself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in years. As the evening grew late and Audrey finally went to bed, Alexandra and William sat on the front porch, looking at the stars barely visible through the city's glow. The silence was comfortable, free of the sharp edges that had defined their previous interactions. "I meant what I said about the consulting," Alexandra said finally. "Your knowledge could revolutionize our safety protocols. But more than that, I think your perspective could change how we do business. You see people, not just profit margins." William nodded slowly. "I'll think about it. But if I do this, we do it right." Safety first, profits second. And I'll need to bring in other veterans, men and women who understand what it means to fly when failure isn't an option. Whatever you need. Alexandra agreed, then surprised herself by adding, I've been thinking about tonight. About how I've been living. My father built Sterling Industries to connect people. To make the world smaller through aviation. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that and made it about dominance instead. Maybe you could help me remember. William looked at her, seeing not the Ice Queen who'd mocked him hours ago, but a woman beginning to thaw, to question, to grow. Change is hard, Alex. It means admitting we were wrong, that we've hurt people. It means doing better, even when no one's watching. I know, she said quietly. But I had a good teacher tonight. A janitor who showed me that dignity isn't about what you do. It's about how you treat people while you're doing it. As Alexandra's car pulled away, William stood on his porch, reflecting on the strange turns life could take. He'd started the day as an invisible janitor and ended it having changed one of the most powerful women in New York. But more importantly, he'd kept his promise to help people, just in a different way than he'd ever imagined. Inside, he checked on Audrey one more time, straightening her blanket and kissing her forehead. On her nightstand sat a photo of Sarah. Forever young. Forever smiling. I flew tonight, Sarah, he whispered. Broke my promise to save a life. I hope you understand. The next morning brought a media storm. Videos of William's heroic flight had gone viral overnight, with headlines proclaiming janitor revealed as war hero and CEO, humbled by hidden hero. But William ignored the calls from reporters, focusing instead on getting Audrey ready for school, making her favorite pancakes, braiding her hair the way Sarah used to. At Sterling Industries, Alexandra called an all-staff meeting. Standing before 500 employees, she publicly apologized, not just to William, but to all the support staff she'd overlooked or dismissed. She announced the Carter Foundation and new policies ensuring every employee, regardless of position, would be treated with dignity and respect. The janitor who'd saved lives was now changing corporate culture. 3 months later, William stood in Sterling Industries' new aviation safety center, watching veteran pilots train on advanced simulators he'd helped design. The walls held photos of pilots who'd given their lives saving others, with Sarah's picture among them. Audrey often came after school, doing homework while her father taught others how to handle the worst-case scenarios. Alexandra visited regularly. No longer the untouchable CEO, but a leader, learning to connect with her people. She and Audrey had developed an unexpected friendship, the little girl teaching the executive how to be human again. Sometimes, Alexandra would join them for dinner, these two broken people and one wise child forming an unlikely family of choice. On the anniversary of that fateful gala, Alexandra stood on the same rooftop, addressing a crowd of employees and their families. William stood beside her, not as a janitor or an executive, but as a partner in reshaping what Sterling Industries stood for. A year ago, I thought power meant standing above others, Alexandra said, her voice carrying clearly. William Carter taught me that real power means lifting others up. He showed me that a janitor could be a hero, that humility is stronger than pride, and that the measure of a person isn't their title, but their character. The crowd applauded, but William stepped forward, raising his hand for quiet. Miss Sterling taught me something too. She taught me that people can change, that second chances matter, and that sometimes the person who hurts you most can become someone worth forgiving. We're all walking around with our wounds, our fears, our failures. The question is whether we let them define us or refine us. As the sun set over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, William and Alexandra stood side by side, no longer CEO and janitor, but two people who'd found grace in the most unexpected place. Audrey ran between them, holding both their hands, a bridge between two worlds that were learning to become one. The helicopter that had started it all sat on the helipad, gleaming in the dying light. It was no longer just a symbol of wealth and power, but a reminder that heroes come in all forms, that dignity exists in every honest job, and that sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who can save us, not just from danger, but from ourselves. William looked at the helicopter, then at his daughter, then at Alexandra, who'd become so much more than the cold CEO he'd once known. He'd lost his first chance at happiness when Sarah died, had thought his flying days were over forever. But life, he was learning, had a way of offering second chances in the most unexpected ways. Not the fairy tale anyone had expected, but something better, something real, something earned, something that honored both the pain of the past and the promise of the future. The city lights began to twinkle below as the three of them headed inside together. A janitor who'd remembered how to soar, a CEO who'd learned how to be human, and a little girl who'd taught them both that love was the only wealth that really mattered.